Tonight, the weather may have cooled off, but the race to become Toronto's next mayor is heating up.
It is still a great city, this wonderful Toronto, but it needs to be a great city for everyone.
Olivia Chow officially enters the campaign to become mayor. We'll have the latest on what has now become a very crowded race. And
we believe through this increase of investment and overhaul of the system, we can do better, lift our standards and the ambitions of Ontario children.
The education minister says his new bill will modernize education and raise standards. It will also give the province more power over school boards and what they teach. Plus,
as the residential population grows on the waterfront, could there be demand for a CBC system?
a water bus, more water taxis, and even a ferry service connecting Scarborough and Etobicoke to the downtown. What waterfront officials are considering for the city's future. Good evening. A familiar name in Toronto politics has entered the race for mayor. Former NDP MP Olivia Chow has officially launched her campaign after being out of the public eye for almost a decade. Ali Chiasson joins us now live from City Hall. Ali, will Olivia Chow being on the ballot shake things up?
Well, she definitely brings name recognition. How about this? Early polls had her leading alongside Josh Matlow and Anna Bilow before she even announced that she was running. So it makes things interesting. And even though she failed to get the job before, she says her time is now.
This is a different Toronto, both from when Olivia Chow was a downtown NDP member of parliament in the mid-2000s. It's also a different Toronto from when she last ran for mayor in 2014.
We have to make a city that is more affordable. It is still a great city, this wonderful Toronto, but it needs to be a great city for everyone.
But Chow was mum on platform ideas today.
Hang tight, anything big will come later.
Regarding Ontario Place, however,
I do know that mega luxury spa down by the waterfront is not what I want and not what Torontonians want.
Now that Chow has entered the crowded race of 48 candidates, could she split votes?
I'm not worried about splitting votes. I'm worried about what the mom feels today, tonight, when after paying rent, there's not a whole lot left, that they have to find a food bank. I'm worried about folks tonight that can't find a shelter and they're using TDC as our shelter. That's what I'm worried about.
If you feel you've heard a lot of this on the campaign trail already, it's because you have.
Every homeless person deserves a home. Every immigrant deserves a chance.
Our city has become unaffordable, and there are far too many people on our streets who need a home.
And I love this city. I'm running for mayor to make sure that Toronto works for everyone.
I think they all have that challenge of hearing similar commentary, similar promises, certain similar campaign stances from somebody else in that lead pack.
With Olivia Chow on the ballot, those on the political left need to think about ways to differentiate themselves.
That could be distinguishing themselves by personality, distinguishing themselves by messaging or mode of messaging. Are you knocking on doors? Are you relying on mass advertising? Are you relying on social media? Ironically, this is an election campaign where you're not only running against those whose policies are different than yours, you're kind of needing to distinguish yourself from those whose positions may be on some issues somewhat similar to yours.
Today, Olivia Chow kept things politically polite when commenting on her competition.
We all have wonderful ideas. Candidates have good ideas. And it would be wonderful that we actually listen to each other's ideas. Reject those that you don't support. Say yes. Be strong enough to say yes. That's not a bad idea at all. Why not do this together? Yes, one of us will become the mayor. Hopefully it's me.
So let's do a little look back. Back in 2014, Olivia Chow lost the mayoral election, obviously, to John Tory. Then a year later, she went to earn back her seat on Parliament Hill. She lost that election to Liberal Adam Vaughan. Then she took that about a decade hiatus. She says, this year really is her year. When you ask her about what she learned from those consecutive losses, she says she feels more confident. She is not going to stick to every word of a carefully worded speech. She's going to speak from the heart and speak from experience. Maribel.
We'll see how that unfolds during her campaign. Thank you for this, Ali. Ontario's education minister wants to give himself more power over school boards and what they teach. He says it's about improving student success. He's also proposing giving more control to his ministry over school buildings. Lorenda Redekop has more on that.
The education minister says he wants schools going back to basics in areas such as math and reading.
The government's introducing the Better Schools and Student Outcomes Act.
He tabled his bill this afternoon.
We believe through this increase of investment and overhaul of the system, we can do better, lift our standards.
He announced 1,000 more teachers to prepare for de-streaming when students start high school, and a 2.7% increase for school boards, though critics note the amount is below the level of inflation.
It is more smoke and mirrors from a minister who will do literally anything but take responsibility for his own underfunding of education and the impact that that's having on kids.
School boards are surprised by the push to go back to basics.
School boards across Ontario have no problem with focusing on arithmetic and reading and writing because that's what we do. That's already what we are doing.
Minister Lecce also says some schools are underperforming. Under his plan, boards will have to publicly post an improvement plan. One teachers union says more staff is what students and their parents really want.
Sure, maybe they want to see a chart on a board website about the priorities, but they want to know that their students get the attention and support that they need.
Lecce also proposes more training for school board trustees and a process to resolve disputes. He gave the example of the board in Peel. The government took control there after problems with racism.
I don't want to step in any further. I want school boards to be more functioning, more professional bodies.
The legislation would also allow building of schools to be sped up, for empty schools to go to another school board or be used for something else.
Well, then we could put it to use for things like LTC or affordable housing or social housing or things like this that are actually pretty critical right now.
But the province doesn't allow for the closing of schools. One public education advocate criticizes how the government developed the legislation.
What is surprising about this is a big piece of legislation, and it appears to have been crafted with no previous consultation. It seems to be a surprise to everybody working in the system.
Consultations will come before the bill is passed. Lorenda Redekop, CBC News, Toronto.
And MPPs debating the government's latest proposed housing bill at Queen's Park. The Helping Homeowners Protecting Tenants Act is in its second reading today.
Our government believes that it doesn't matter where you live in Ontario, it should be a place to grow. The new policy would provide municipalities with a variety of things. Flexibility, the opportunity to create more homes in both urban and rural communities. Will support local economies, it will create jobs.
Bill 97 aims to introduce amendments to the Building Code Act and Residential Tenancies Act. The housing minister says the bill would make several small changes to key pieces of land use legislation that would help the government meet its goal of building 1.5 million new homes over the next decade. NDP MPPs are asking for clarity on how the bill would affect sprawl and green space in the province. Well, the hints keep on coming from the provincial government on the future of Ontario Place and whether the Science Centre could move to that location. Today in question period, the Minister of Infrastructure says both the Science Centre and Ontario Place need to be revitalized.
The Science Centre is a public treasure, which is why our government for the last number of years has been looking at whether or not the option of relocation to preserve the Science Centre should take place. Now, the structure itself has deteriorated as well, as has Ontario Place. Our government is making the financial investments necessary to preserve these two treasures.
The Premier quipped last week that an announcement could be coming soon on moving the site of the Science Centre from the Flemington Park neighbourhood to Ontario Place. The NDP says the PCs aren't being forthcoming with their plans and is calling for the government to be more transparent. They want to be assured that developers with ties to the government aren't behind a relocation plan. More than 155,000 public servants will go on strike Wednesday if their union doesn't reach a deal with the federal government by tomorrow night. Kate McKenna has more on a labor dispute that could have big implications.
Thank you.
After nearly 2 years of negotiating, an ultimatum.
We're setting a clock on this round of bargaining. If there is no deal reached by 9 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow, April 18th, I am authorizing a national general strike beginning at 12:01 a.m.
The main sticking point is wages. The union says workers are feeling the pinch of inflation.
Workers are fed up. We watch corporations make record profits, but yet nobody wants to pay working people.
If a strike goes ahead, it'll be the largest public sector strike in decades. Canadians could expect delays in processing tax returns, passports, even traveling across the border.
Will the government get serious and negotiate a fair contract that respects the public service workers?
The government is committed to reaching agreements at the bargaining table that are fair for the employees and reasonable for taxpayers. We have a good offer on the table, and there's enough ground to reach a deal.
PSAC is Canada's largest federal public sector union. It says it intends to use its size to pressure the government into giving them the best possible deal, setting the bar for future negotiations. But some warn that comes at a cost to taxpayers.
It's completely unsustainable, and quite frankly, many Canadians across the country are worried about gasoline, worried about the price of groceries. Many Canadians are worried about losing their homes as mortgage payments go up, and they can't afford these government union demands.
The union says if it comes to a strike, they're prepared to picket for as long as it takes. They've even set up porta potties outside for their members. Kate McKenna, CBC News, Ottawa.
Toronto police have arrested a driver they say was involved in a fatal hit-and-run over the weekend. It happened Sunday morning near Bloor and Islington. Police were called after a 69-year-old woman was struck by a car as she was walking in the area around 8:30 in the morning. The driver of the vehicle that hit her didn't remain at the scene. The victim was rushed to hospital where she died from her injuries. Investigators say 66-year-old Susan Atkinson of Toronto turned herself into police this morning. She's now been charged with failing to stop at an accident causing death. One person is dead after a fight at an apartment building in the city's West End Sunday. Police were called to Lisgar Street, just off of Queen, for reports of a fight at around 9 p.m. When they arrived, they found one person with no vital signs. Life-saving measures were performed by first responders, but the person was pronounced dead on scene. There's no information on the victim's age or gender. And two other homicides in Toronto this weekend. A fatal shooting also in the West End late Friday night near Bloor and Delaware. Police say multiple shots were fired. They've identified the victim as 25-year-old Munawar Warsama of Toronto. No arrests have been made, but police say a suspect or suspects took off in a dark-colored sedan. Meantime, a Kitchener man has been identified as the victim of a fatal Saturday afternoon shooting in North York near Clearview Heights and Trethewey Drive. Tola Paul was shot in an apartment building. He was taken to hospital where he was pronounced dead. Where am I, Colette? What day is this? What happened?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of folks that are like, I'm awake, right?
Yeah, just yesterday, I swear I was wearing shorts.
Yeah, and when you get, 7 days in a row where the temperature was warmer than 20 degrees in April, so really, it's not like it was a couple. Folks got accustomed to it. And I spent a lot of time last week standing up here with the Almanac board and showing the record high and then revealing the new record high that we'd set, because that happened 3 days in a row. And of course, I can't do that today because the record's 28.5, and we were nowhere near that. A normal high at this time of year, 13, well, we were up to 12 degrees. And if you're saying, what? It didn't feel that way, it's because that was around midnight. And then as that colder air was ushered in behind the front, of course, the temperature was actually falling. So in terms of an afternoon temperature, it was a much cooler feel, very similar to where we are right now. And it's not just the 4s you're seeing. How about 2 in Hamilton and 2 for Kitchener as well? Then you add in that southerly flow, south to southwesterly. Often that brings in warmer air, but this has just been pumping in the breeze. And these are the sustained winds. We're actually finding the gusts have been closer to over 40 or 50 kilometers an hour. So breezy and wet, and not just showers. With that colder air that we've got to the west of us, we are seeing some wet flurries. Do we have the risk of that in our skies in Toronto tonight? Yes, that chance is there. So it's slim, but probably a little bit of light precipitation coming our way. So your low for tonight, they're going to be just above the freezing mark, right around 1 to 2 degrees. And then for tomorrow, we are still talking about that daytime high being below seasonal. There you have it, Maribel.
Wow, just wow. That's all.
Okay, that sums it up.
Welcome back. Waterfront Toronto is exploring ways to make traffic headaches on the road a thing of the past for some, taking some commuters off the road and on the water. It's examining a potential water bus system on the lake, more water taxis, and the possibility of a ferry service connecting places like Scarborough, Etobicoke, and Niagara to the city centre. Angelina King explains.
What if your commute could go from this to this? That's what Waterfront Toronto is trying to make happen. It's put out a request for proposals to find a firm to study how feasible it would be to increase water taxi and ferry service and implement a bus system on Lake Ontario. The goal?
Try to better connect this whole waterfront and make it more accessible.
Chris Glashik says changes are needed to accommodate the development and popularity of the waterfront, especially when the Portlands neighborhood near Cherry Beach is complete.
That will probably have around 10,000 people living on it. How are they going to get from Villiers Island to the downtown, to the Ontario Place and Exhibition Grounds, or even to the airport? Water is an obvious possibility.
Another possibility, expanding ferry routes to connect places like Scarborough, Etobicoke, and Niagara.
But this is really in the early stages. The study would determine if there's even a demand for a commuter water system. It would also look at who would operate and pay for it. In the meantime, the idea has already got pushback and support.
I think that's pretty cool.
Ying Lu lives along the waterfront and says she likes the idea of getting around by boat.
I think it would be a lot more convenient.
But Paul Howard, the Commodore of the Outer Harbour Sailing Federation, says he's against more boats near Cherry Beach.
Any increased motorized traffic creates a wake, creates erosion, and also disrupts and can capsize people on stand-up paddleboards, sailing dinghies, windsurfers, kiteboarders.
Plus, he says during bad weather, commuters could be in for a rough ride.
If it was blowing 20 knots of wind, immediately upon coming out of the Eastern Gap, there'd be 6-foot waves.
Waterfront Toronto says a new system would increase access to the Toronto Islands, which draws crowds in the summer.
The ferry doesn't have the capacity to manage it.
Tony Fairbrother is the chair of the Toronto Island Community Association and says there is a demand. He just hopes any new system places the community's needs first.
The decision's always being made on what's the most profitable way of doing things.
Waterfront Toronto says it's all about striking a balance and prioritizing safety. The feasibility study is expected to be complete this fall. Angelina King, CBC News, Toronto.
The city has begun the process of opening up its seasonal washrooms and fountains.
We're going to open our washrooms starting in April, and all our washrooms will be open by early May, and they open up at 9 a.m. till 10 p.m. in the evening, and then we'll close our washrooms for the season in late October.
The city says it's accelerating facility openings this year, with some already completed. Today, staff are working on opening the Woodbine bathing station. It takes about 2 to 3 days to get each facility up and running. As of this morning, more than 30 of the 128 Seasonal washrooms are fully open to the public. The city says it will open spray and splash pads in mid-May. Wading pools and outdoor pools are scheduled to open by late June. The city budgets more than $180 million annually for maintenance, staffing, and operation of approximately 1,500 parks. 24 Toronto councillors have signed a letter to the Federal Electoral Boundaries Commission for Ontario. They're opposed to proposed changes to federal ridings, changes that would reduce Toronto's electoral districts from 25 to 24. As Talia Ricci reports, councillors warn the move will reduce the city's representation at all levels of government.
City councillors are arguing that as Toronto grows and grapples with challenges like mental health and housing, the city needs more representation, not less.
By reducing the number of ridings in Toronto, the federal government is further silencing the diversity of our community, many of whom already feel disenfranchised by governments and institutions.
The Federal Electoral Boundaries Commission for Ontario released its report in February recommending 24 federal seats in Toronto, down from 25. That means if an election is held after April 2024, the city will be represented by one fewer MP in the next parliament. 24 out of 25 councillors signed a letter to the commission opposing the changes.
As Deputy Mayor for the City of Toronto, I am strongly opposed to any proposal that would reduce the number of ridings within our great city. It was wrong when the Electoral Commission proposed removing a riding in Scarborough, and it is wrong now to propose removing a riding in North York.
I think it's understandable that whenever you're going to have a loss of a riding, people become concerned about their reduced voice in Ottawa and their reduced voice in the case of the City of Toronto at City Hall.
Scarborough was set to lose one of its 6 ridings, but pushback from MPs in the community helped to stop it. The new proposed changes to the riding map have eliminated the current riding of Don Valley East, merging it with Scarborough Centre, a new riding called Don Valley South, and a smaller portion joining Don Valley North.
If the current system stays in place, when the federal government reduces the number of federal constituencies in Toronto from 25 to 24, you'd then have to reduce the size of Toronto City Council by 1. Toronto City councillors are not going to like that idea. One of them is going to be out of the job.
Councillors say the commission consulted widely on its initial proposed boundaries, but when it announced the new boundaries, there wasn't a fair chance for the public to weigh in.
During redistribution, things like this happen. But the problem with the process that took place is that no one in Don Valley East and the other communities that were impacted, Scarborough Centre, Don Valley West, Scarborough Guildwood, other communities, no one had an opportunity to weigh in on this new map. It was never presented. It caught everyone off guard.
Don Valley East MP Michael Coteau says he'll be making a recommendation to the committee at the House of Commons to revisit the consultation process. 2 city councillors also passed motions opposing the redistribution and asking for greater transparency and public notice. Talia Ricci, CBC News, Toronto.
The Canadian Broadcasting Corporation has stopped posting its news on Twitter. The pause is because of a new label the social media company has slapped on the CBC. That happened days after a tweet by a Canadian politician. Thomas Dagla explains.
Canada's public broadcaster says it won't be tweeting for now, amid a spat over its funding and editorial independence. At issue is Twitter's move to tag CBC's corporate page as government-funded media, a label demanded by the leader of the opposition when Pierre Poilievre told Twitter's owner, Elon Musk, Canadians need to be protected against disinformation and manipulation by state media.
The fact that he has to run to American billionaires for support to attack Canadians says a lot about Mr. Poilievre and his values.
The news continues here, of course, on BBC One.
Twitter recently started applying similar labels to broadcasters like Britain's BBC and U.S. National Public Radio. BBC fought the move and got its label changed to publicly funded. According to Twitter's own definition, when an outlet is tagged government funded, it means there may be varying degrees of government involvement over editorial content. Just the type of perception that media outlets want to avoid, says this former editor.
News organizations that are funded in that way need to have a very firm arm's length relationship and be able to say we are independent and we are trusted.
Through a parliamentary appropriation, CBC and the French language Radio-Canada receive more than $1 billion a year in public funding. But the Broadcasting Act states the corporation remains editorially independent of the government.
CBC has no track record being a propaganda to Canadian government in any time of the history.
The Crown Corporation insists its journalism is impartial. CBC says it reached out to Twitter and will pause its use of the platform to share news with its audience. Thomas Daigle, CBC News, Toronto.
U.S. authorities have arrested 2 men accused of operating a Chinese secret police station in New York. The men face charges of conspiring to act as agents for Beijing and obstruction of justice. This comes a month after authorities here launched an investigation into 2 suspected police outposts in the Montreal area. Will Denslow reports.
Federal prosecutors said it would be absurd to imagine the New York Police Department setting up a secret precinct in Beijing, but claims this is what the Chinese government has done in the heart of Manhattan. 2 men in New York have been charged with obstruction of justice and conspiracy. They join more than 30 Chinese nationals accused today of conducting harassment and surveillance campaigns. Federal prosecutor Breon Peace says the defendants frequently violated U.S. sovereignty.
This task force isn't a normal police force. It doesn't protect people or combat crimes. It commits crimes, targeting Chinese democracy activists and dissidents located outside of the PRC, including right here in New York City. The defendants' actions under the direction of the Chinese government are flagrant violations of American sovereignty.
Law enforcement officials had previously expressed concerns of so-called police stations set up on behalf of the Chinese government. Police in Canada say they're investigating such locations that the Chinese embassy calls volunteer-run service stations. William Denslow for CBC News, New York.
A trial involving Fox News and a company with Canadian connections was supposed to have started today in Delaware, but it was delayed, leading to speculation that Fox could be ready to settle with Dominion Voting Systems. Dominion is suing Fox for $1.6 billion for defamation. Katie Simpson has the details.
This is being billed as one of the most significant media defamation trials in modern U.S. history. Dominion Voting Services, which is actually a Canadian-founded company, is suing Fox News after it broadcast lies and conspiracy theories about the electronic voting machines that Dominion produces. In the aftermath of the 2020 election, a number of Fox guests and hosts made false accusations, spread lies about those machines, saying that they were actually rigged to take votes away from Donald Trump and cost him the 2020 election. A judge in this case has already ruled those claims are lies. They are false. And that's not really what the crux of this trial is going to be. It really is, what did Fox know and when did they know it? Did they knowingly put false claims on the air, knowingly spread lies about these voting machines and about this company? Now, to that point, Dominion is thought widely to have a very strong case. A number of text messages, emails, and depositions confirmed that while publicly these Fox News hosts and guests were saying one thing, giving credibility to these false claims, behind the scenes, they were actually mocking them and questioning them. And that is why it's widely thought that Dominion has a very strong case in this situation. Now, Fox News has defended itself, saying, listen, we are protected by First Amendment freedom of speech rights, and we are just doing our job. They say these were newsworthy claims by then President Donald Trump, and this is the course of doing journalism. They were simply covering the news. That is sort of the test that will be put to jurors when opening arguments get underway. Opening arguments were supposed to begin today, but for unknown reasons, a judge says the trial will actually be delayed until Tuesday, into tomorrow. There have been some American media reports that say Fox is trying to make a last-minute effort to settle this out of court, which at the end of the day suggests that perhaps Fox sees its chances are not as strong as they might hope. Katie Simpson, CBC News, Wilmington, Delaware.
I'm focusing on the silver lining here, Colette.
Okay.
I'm noticing the buds on the trees are out. There are some crocuses, dandelions coming up.
Yes, yes. There is all kinds of things to enjoy. You hear the birds singing, and they're singing earlier in the day, all kinds of wonderful things going on. It is spring, and these ups and downs are not unusual. What was more unusual was that we had that up for so many days. And when you're seeing patterns like that, that's more of an extreme, and that's where we start to look at climate change and what the impact is where we have these extremes or prolonged events. But the little ups and downs, very typical for spring, like how about within even just one day? So this was midnight last night, 12 degrees in Toronto, 11 for Oshawa, 20 in Kingston, 16 in Ottawa. But you notice the cool down had begun in southwestern Ontario, and that colder air has been sweeping across the province, still hanging in there, the nation's capital with double digits, but those will be falling too, no doubt about it. By 6 p.m., looking at this hour, what some of the temperatures are looking like and getting very close to freezing, just barely above. And then tonight we will see that colder air continuing to plunge in. Southwesterly breeze has been strong. Some of the gusts have been over 40, even 50 kilometers an hour, especially through the Niagara region tonight into early tomorrow. We'll still be dealing with that. We've got the wet weather in here, rainfall, but also where we're getting into that colder air or into the Niagara escarpment, some of the higher elevations where we have the snowfall. Now, it's just a bit of wet snow, could be a trace of accumulation to a centimeter or two as you get north of the GTA and west, and maybe a few centimeters or more towards the Bruce Peninsula. But I'm showing you what's happening across our province because, hey, into northwestern Ontario, never mind a trace or two. If you're feeling sorry for yourself because of the change in our weather, they're talking about 10, 20 centimeters into northwestern Ontario as the system works its way through. So, hey, we can deal with a few rain showers close to the lakeshore and some wet flurries. So that risk still tonight into tomorrow even, but then we'll start to see clearing as we go into Wednesday. That means the sun is going to be coming back on Wednesday. And hey, you know what else? The temperatures are going to rebound back to seasonal. So we'll be looking good after a low like this. Going to be a cool start tomorrow morning. And also because it's got a damp feel to it, right? And the high tomorrow, just 6 degrees, and we may struggle to get there. But there you go. You see the improvement and also getting back on that cycle of some rain showers or systems every few days too.
A blast of sun, that'll help this week. Thanks,
Yeah,
Colette.
for sure. You're welcome.
There's growing concern that farming in Canada is in trouble. A new report says the country needs to bring in 30,000 immigrants to fill jobs in the industry. But is Canada ready to support that big wave? Sam Sampson reports.
This year it was wheat. And
Rayhan Khan is no stranger to the farm life. He was a farmer and worked in agricultural science in Pakistan for 2 decades. For him, starting a farm in Canada was the natural move. But he warns other newcomers, it's not easy.
Unfortunately, in the very beginning, couldn't find so much information for this thing. But later, now I know everything. Now I know, how to buy something, from where to buy, where would be get the less price.
Khan hopes it's easier for future migrants, especially since he and others are a key part of Canada's farming future. A recent report shows 40% of Canadian farmers will retire within 10 years. There's also an expected shortage of 24,000 farm, nursery, and greenhouse workers. To fill the gap, researchers say Canada needs 30,000 immigrants who can either start up their own operations or take over existing ones. One solution? Make it easier for experienced temporary foreign workers to become permanent residents.
We're also talking about radically new forms of agriculture, like the explosion of the greenhouse industry over the last, say, 20 years. They need a workforce year-round. So the very notion of a temporary migrant worker that comes in simply for the growing season doesn't really even make sense.
This is not a cheap industry. In many areas, $1 million budget won't even buy a small farm. So some newcomers are frozen out from the get-go.
We get lots of calls of people who are eager to start, but there's that gap there between what they can afford and what they're actually going for.
There are provinces like Saskatchewan that have programs specifically to attract egg-focused immigrants to the sector. There is also a federal pilot project which speeds up the permanent resident process for farm-focused newcomers, but that ends in May.
This year I did basically this soil sampling. And
Khan wants to see organized, local advice for newcomers on everything from machinery rentals to hauling grain.
All these things should be considered not only for the immigrant but for the agency, for the immigration department who wants to get farmers in over here.
Khan hopes to build a house on this land to truly make Canada his family's home. Sam Sampson, CBC News, near Yorkton, Saskatchewan.
The Federal Minister of Sport has restored funding to Hockey Canada. 10 months ago, Pascal Saint-Onge froze the national body's annual grant of nearly $8 million. Now, that money is flowing once again. Saint-Onge says the organization has met her conditions. Its grants were pulled after revelations it used fees from amateur hockey registrations to settle cases of alleged sexual assault. Since then, Hockey Canada's board of directors has been replaced and its governance has been overhauled. The Prime Minister was asked about the funding decision, noting that his eldest son plays hockey. He said parents must be confident their kids are safe.
We need to know that the mentality has changed, that the culture is being addressed. We put extremely clear expectations before Hockey Canada, before we would restore funding to them. They have indicated a real willingness to move forward on that, but we are going to continue to be extremely vigilant around ensuring that they continue to be worthy of the trust that millions of Canadians put in them as we encourage our kids to play sports, and specifically hockey.
As we head to break, here's a look at where the markets closed today. The TSX rose 62 points, the Dow climbed 100 points, and the dollar traded down to 74.64 cents US. We'll be right back. Explosions and gunfire continue to rock Sudan for the third straight day as a power struggle between the country's armed forces and members of a militia group fighting the government intensifies. Chris Brown has the latest.
In Sudan's capital, Khartoum, it seems anyone who can get out is doing so. The entire country may be rapidly spiraling toward a civil breakdown. We are heading for our hometown where we'll wait for a victory statement from Sudan's army, he said. But that kind of proclamation seems wildly premature. The paramilitary group known as Rapid Support Forces released video of its troops purportedly in control of a second major airport. The militia's powerful leader, known as Hemedti, has been an ally of the country's military chief, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, but had a falling out over how his troops would fit into the country's army, sparking this internal war. But it is civilians who are bearing the brunt of it.
Everything is empty here.
This blogger showed bare store shelves in the capital. Food and bottled water are scarce, and desperate people may soon start looting, he said.
We are since roughly 3 days here stuck in a school.
Katerina von Schroeder with the NGO Save the Children has been sheltering in a basement with her 8-year-old son, listening to the chaos outside.
The supplies are not coming in. The trucks can't go on the road to bring the new water, the new food. So even if the shops open, they will quickly be sold out and run out of supplies as well.
With a third of the country already facing food shortages, the warning from the head of the UN is dire.
The humanitarian situation in Sudan was already precarious and is now catastrophic.
Khartoum's densely packed residential areas are now battlefields.
The power has been out. That was something. You know, it's like, I don't even know what it is anymore. Is it a rocket-propelled grenade? Is that a military strike?
For civilians, it seems nowhere is safe. Chris Brown, CBC News, London.
France is warning that the country could face another summer of wildfires. The country faced its biggest woodland blaze of the season over the weekend. Flames destroyed nearly 25 acres along its Mediterranean border with Spain. The fire was brought under control today, but about 350 people had to leave their homes. Southern France and Spain had wildfires this past winter because there wasn't enough rain following last summer's drought. The French Interior Minister says the fire season is starting early this year because of climate warming. Some Nigerian women are demonstrating how to earn a living while fighting gender stereotypes. They are members of the Dragon Squad, a security team consisting of what they themselves describe as plus-sized women. Here's what they're all about in their own words.
My name is Thomas.
We are Dragon Squad.
When we started, we had difficulty to make the society believe that as women we can actually conduct and operate on the event security. So we had issues. Most time when you talk to a client, the client will say, all females, no, this part of it, you guys cannot handle it.
Before I joined Dragon's Walk, I was thinking women could only do maybe hairdressers, sell things in the market, or probably sit at home like housewife. But after I joined, I realized that women can do more. We are strong. We can do the men's job too.
I first of all look at the physical, the body size. I now talk about your passion and other qualification of yours.
The two genders, male and female. Then you, the customer, have to decide. Do I want a female girl squad? That's what I wanted. And you have to decide which one do you want. For me, I prefer to be seen by women.
So when crisis is about to happen, we apply that system and everywhere is calm and we are able to control the situation till the event is over.
Hundreds of kite enthusiasts are flying high this week. They're showcasing their designs at an international kite festival in eastern China. Thousands of kites have filled the sky during the annual event, which attracts visitors from around the world. The festival runs from April 15th to May 20th and includes a range of activities from lantern and fireworks shows to musical performances and food fairs. The highlight is a series of kite flying competitions. There's a rich history of kite craftsmanship in the area. 70% of the world's kites are made there. Impressive coordination too, like my kite would just get wrapped up with somebody else's pretty quickly.
You and I are so alike. That's where my head is at. How are those that many in one spot? I mean, I know you know the general wind direction, so it's probably like how they don't get tangled. Anyway, it's a beautiful sight and good on them. You're right. There's some wonderful coordination. Well, here's what we have happening here. I know we have the rain showers, of course. You probably noticed that, but also where we've got the temperatures already cooling back closer to freezing, not even necessarily at it or below, but just seeing some of these wet flurries that are showing up as well. A trace in the higher elevations, could be a few centimeters up towards the Bruce Peninsula, but that's really as we get into tomorrow because there's still a chance of this kind of hanging in there with some of our cooler air that we get a few flurries at times, wet flurries near the lakeshore. It's more some light rain showers. 1 tonight, 6 for tomorrow, but you only have to hang in there another day. Wednesday, the sun will be back and temperatures back to seasonal.
Okay, Colette, thank you.
You're welcome.
And that's our show for you tonight. Thank you for joining us. We will see you back here tomorrow at 6. Have yourselves a great night, everyone. Good night.